Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2. We are excited to be back to the Aviation Emissions Symposium. My name is Cindy Gibbs. I'm with Tetra Tech International. We're a BridgeNet company with Tetra Tech. So we wanted to start off today with a thank you to the Planning Committee for putting on the symposium with UC Davis. These are all of the members of the program planning committee. So if you see them out in the wild, please tell them thank you. And then we also wanted to thank our sponsor. So if you haven't visited the room next door, make sure you visit the room next door and visit the sponsors. All right, and with that, we're going to get into our presentation this morning. Our session this morning is the psychosocial health impacts of aircraft noise on occupants of an airport and its environs. That is going to be our first speaker this morning. We have 4 speakers. They are all going to be virtual, so we're going to hear their presentation, and then we're going to go into the live portion. Our first speaker this morning is Ayodele Faiyetole, and he is, one moment. He's the recipient of the Todd B. Haley Space Visionary Award. He is a multidisciplinary researcher who holds a Bachelor of Science with honors in physics, a Master's of Science in Space Studies, and a PhD with a dissertation on space applications and climate policies. Please help me welcome and listen to Ayodele.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. And you're welcome to my presentation. My name is Adekunle Faiyetole, and I'm here because of my research interest in sustainable transports. I can be contacted at ayodele.faiyetole@earthspace.com, and I'm from EarthSpace and the Federal University of Technology, Akure, where I work as a researcher. Psychosocial health assessment of aircraft noise on occupants of an airport and its environs. Is a presentation that is based on the research work, the effects of aircraft noise on social health, that appeared on the Journal of Transport and Health. The research is designed on 3 concepts of sound. That's intensity of sound expressed in decibels, frequency weighting, either A or C weighting, and the time variation. These changes in these 3 parameters and the sound quality metrics, could actually be disturbing, especially depending on the person's psychosocial signature. Aircrafts, like many other inventions and innovations, come with their own externalities, from emissions to accidents and noise. And this study, this particular research, is based on the aircraft noise, and that is because aircraft noise has been quite prominent and relatable since the design of the jet engine, and to the extent that the ICAO had considered to the seriousness of noise as far as 1969. So on this note, aircraft noise is the most health-threatening source of noise pollution among all modes of transports, and is a stressor with identifiable effects on occupants' well-being and social behavior at airports and environs. The objective of this study includes the assessment of aircraft noise exposure levels of occupants within 4-kilometer distance. And this is important because there has been serious proliferation of airlines, bringing about increased aircraft movements at the airport locations. The 4-kilometer distance is taken from the proposal by Faiyetole and Ibrahim, 2019. There have been serious debates in the literature with respect to the demographics effects of psychosocial health issues from aircraft noise. And studies such as Joaquin, investigated the Chinese ethnicity and supported by Kaltenbach in 2016. Other research, so that Rocha et al. Have also documented demographics impact of the aircraft noise. The focal point of this study, as a matter of fact, is the perceptions of the participants with respect to their psychosocial health issues and the time of the day they felt the health condition. The study was carried out at Muritala Mohammed Airport and its environments at Ikeja in Lagos. This location was initially, originally at the periphery, but due to population surge and urban expansion, the airport has merged or fused with the residential areas of the airport, to the extent that more people tend to get prone to the noise from aircraft. The study is a two-pronged study whereby there's a mix between the C-weighted temporal noise logging and the subjective surveying of psychosocial health indicators. With regard to the C-weighting, C-weighting was chosen above the A-weighting, which is the most popular way of measuring noise level, because of Chul's research in 1982 and supported by Miller et al. In 1998, that was conducted at the Baltimore Washington International Airport, of course, with works from Moore in 2010. With respect to the surveying of psychosocial health issues, Vieira et al. In 2019 have shown that there's a strong correlation between subjective listening and annoyance. And this informed this research experiment. And based on this, 6 temporal noise indicators were designed, which is a direct deviation from the practice, whereby the sound pressure level was always measured between morning, that is the day, evening, and night. In this case, I designed or calibrated it for early morning, afternoon, evening, night, and midnight. So the sound pressure level, LCEQ, equivalence for C weighting, was between 4 and 9 a.m. in the morning for early morning, and for afternoon is between 12 noon and 4 p.m., for example, and for midnight, it is between the hours of the 24-hour and 4 a.m. in the morning. So from this, the field results that was at the Murtala Mohammed Airport give this noise map, which is also typical to the noise observed by the occupants of the airport and its environs every day. So the result was measured for morning and afternoon, and it also obeyed the 4-kilometer distance that was planned. So the following data was logged for each of the reading. The airline producing the noise, and of course showing also the aircraft. With the airline, we're able to get the aircraft, and the coordinates where the noise level was taken was recorded, and the minimum, maximum, and the average noise produced was also recorded, and the time of the day when the noise was logged down was also taken. So from the field, we're able to conclude and show that takeoff aircraft are generally higher in terms of noise levels than the landing aircraft. For example, the highest noise level in DBC for takeoff aircraft here was 128.8 dBc, while it is just 119.7 dBc for landing aircraft. With respect to the a temporal difference in noise level. It shows that in the afternoon, the result was generally higher than that of morning readings for noise levels. And the older the aircraft, the younger the noise produced. The more the noise produced than the younger ones is a pattern that was seen from the study. 58.8% of the participants of this study have experienced aircraft noise from this particular location, while 58.5% of the participants work in the airports and its environs, implying that just less than 40% of the participants were having the location as a residential area, while 3.5% did not live or even work in that area. So, and it shows a very strong significance and goodness of fit. This study showed us that between the hours of morning and afternoon, the participants felt subjectively or experienced noise more than any other time of the day. And that is telling because it is an occupational noise assessment study from the previous slide. For example, we have 40.2% and 49.4% of the respondents, showed on a 5-scale Likert, picking the highest to be their experience with respect to noise at that location. It shows very strong significance. The only one that did not show significance is the the evening noise level recorded. With respect to the demographics, I considered gender, age, educational attainment, duration, and land use type. And the result shows very clearly significance for highest education obtained and duration of living in that particular area. With a very strong significance in higher education, that is from the binomial logistic regression results. There was a correlation test, to subjects, the 12 health indicators and the participants' subjectivity to noise. And the result shows very strong on the 5-scale Likert data for communication interference, sleep disruption, annoyance, hearing problems, anxiety, and chronic headache. So this result leads us to performing the extent of these results. And we have the ordinal logistic regression showing us that annoyance is very prominent in the midnight hours, which most often is always most often for the participants in the midnight hours and its significance. It's also most often in the morning, but without any significance, and less often in the night with less significance. For disruption, the result of the Hod ratio is important for age above 50, while it is also above 1 for midnights for most often, which also shows a very strong result for for midnights at most often. And for hearing problems, the ages that felt it most are between the ages of 30 and 39. And the result is the odd ratios is strong for midnight hours at most often. While when it happens in the afternoon or in the morning, it comes with significance, with some significant level. So for communication interference, the result is between 30 and 39, just like we had for hearing problems with respect to odds ratios. And the result is less often from early morning and night period, which is the most important result for that as well. For high blood pressure, the most important result is for early morning and night at moderate level. However, when it occurs in the morning, it shows some level of significance for not so often. So for sexual potency, the most important result for ages between 40 and 49 is most often with significance at midnight hours. The chronic headache occurred more for age bracket 30 and 39 with very strong odd ratios, well above 1. And the most important result for when it occurs most is midnight hours, and most often with level of significance. When it occurs in the morning, the result is higher, however, with less impact at moderate. The depression consequence from aircraft noise shows a very strong result for midnight as well, at most often. And we also have midnight in the morning. We also have most often in the morning and the evening. However, for the midnight, it comes with some level of significance. For anxiety, the age bracket for impact or effect is above 50. And the most important temporal result is for morning hours, at most often with level of significance, just like we have most often without significance in the midnight period. For stress, the result shows some significance slightly for most often in the morning hours, and most often without significance in the midnight hours. And for cognitive performance, the result is between the ages of 30 and 39. And midnight, the moderate result is for morning. The result is moderate for morning hours and with significance. That is the most important result. For psychosis, the most important result is midnight for most often. However, when it happens in the morning, it is with some strong significance, but at moderate level, for the ages of between 30 and 49. So generally, the summary of the study implies that annoyance is more likely to be caused in the morning, in the midnight hour, while disruption also, just like annoyance, is caused in the midnight hours or is aggravated in the midnight hours. And the most important result for hearing problems is in the morning, during the morning hours, while the most important result for communication interference is at midnight and early morning hours. For blood pressure, the result is quite noticeable in the morning periods, while for sexual potency it is expectedly midnight. And for migraine, the most important result is at midnight as well. But when it occurs in the afternoon, it comes with a very strong, significant level. And for depression, the result shows prominence during midnight. Anxiety, it is early morning for anxiety. The most important result for stress is night time, while the most important result for cognitive performance is during the night. But when it occurs in the morning hours, it comes with very strong significance. And the most important result for psychosis is morning hours. So there are 4 conclusions drawn from this study. 1, there is a very strong linear periodic exposure risk relationship with different levels of estimates found for all the health indicators surveyed. This supports the existing literature from work such as Besner et al., Borden et al., and other researchers in this space. The most important result has to do with the conclusion that the higher the participant educational attainment, the higher their likelihood they are annoyed by aircraft noise. So, which implies that the more education the participants gained or get, the more they'll be sensitive to noise level. And this result, this conclusion is well established in the literature, but this study also confirms it, that the contributive powers of distances to aircraft noise, cannot be undermined. With respect to duration of occupying the airport environment, it also contributes significantly to how the participant felt to the aircraft noise. So the DOI for the research, the effect of aircraft noise on psychosocial health, is found on this link presented here. And my future research is actually planned not on totally subjective level, but a mix between subjective and clinical measurements of the effect of aircraft noise on psychosocial health indicators. On this note, I'd like to say thank you for your attention, and I'll be available for any questions. Once again, I can be contacted at Faiyetole, ayodele.faiyetole@EarthSpace.com. I'd really appreciate some level of collaboration for the mentioned future research plan, which I've already designed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ayodele. We will be hearing from him in the Q&A session. Our next speaker is Martin Roosli. He is a professor for environmental epidemiology at the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute in Basel and leads the Environmental Exposures and Health Unit. He has a background in atmospheric physics and a PhD in environmental epidemiology. So please welcome Martin.
Welcome, everybody. Here is Martin Roosli from the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute. It is my great pleasure to present the ongoing update of the Swiss regulation for transportation noise. This is actually work that I not only have done myself, but we have done that together in the Federal Commission for Noise Abatement in Switzerland. So what I will present today is first the legal situation in Switzerland. Then I will present a few noise research projects in Switzerland, which were the basis for the proposed regulation, and then the methods we used for deriving limits and the proposed regulation, of course. And then also I will outline the next step. It's very important. What I present is a proposal that has been submitted by the end of last year to the government, but this is not yet in legal action. The legal basis for the noise protection limits are on the one hand in the federal constitutions in Article 74, where it is written that the Confederation shall issue regulations on the protection of humans and their natural environment from harmful or annoying effects. So the or is also something that I will come back later, is very important here, harmful or annoying. Then in the environmental law is written that the limit values for noise and vibration shall be set in such a way that according to the state of scientific knowledge or experience, exposure below these values do not significantly disturb the well-being of the population. So we have two important points here. One is that the limit should be based on scientific knowledge or experience, and that the disturbance should not be significantly. So the aim is not to prevent from any disturbance, but it should prevent from significant disturbance. And then the last important point, the limits shall also take into account the effects on vulnerable groups of people, such as children, the sick, the elderly, and pregnant women. And this is the current guidelines in Switzerland. Basically, it's a bit more complex than presented here. Here I present a simplified version, taking into account various correction factors that may apply at different places. And this is just the most typical values for different sensitivity levels. In total, we have 4 different sensitivity levels, but sensitivity level 2 and 3 are most important. Sensitivity level 2 refers to residential area, and sensitivity level 3 to mixed areas where people live, and there's also light business. For daytime limits in decibels, for road and aircraft, the limits are 60 decibels in sensitivity level 2, and for railway 65. And typically during night, levels are 10 decibels lower, but with some exceptions. For railway, it's 58 decibels, and between 20 and 23 hours o'clock, the levels are 55 decibels. Note that we also have a night curfew between midnight and 5 o'clock in the morning for aircraft night. For the sensitivity level 3, levels are typically 5 dBs higher. So what is the problem with these limits? Actually, these limits are quite old. So they have been determined in the Swiss noise ordinance in 1987 for road and rail. For aircraft, there was some revision in 2001, but it is very clear that such limit cannot be based on scientific evidence anymore, because at that time the research was not that far as it has been nowadays. Basically, these limits were derived based on the results for from a few surveys about annoyance. So already 14 years ago, the Federal Noise Abatement Commission has started some preliminary work to see whether these limits are still representing the scientific knowledge. There were some input papers proposed. There was done a synthesis report, and it was concluded that it needs more work, and that some financial input is needed to revise these guidelines. It was then also a research concept developed that has been published. And finally, there were 2 main activities related to that. One was the Siren study, which was a large interdisciplinary study that took place between 2013 up to 2018. Still, papers are published nowadays. And the noise guidelines from the WHO, which have been published in 2018. So let's briefly talk about the Siren study, which is a study that included 5 main parts. So on the one hand, we had exposure modeling and exposure setups for the sleep laboratory, which were done by EMPA and N.O.I.S.E. Then we have done representative survey in the Swiss population to learn about annoyance, sleep disturbance, and coping response. We have done research in the sleep lab to better understand what is going on during night if people are noise exposed. And then we had 2 large epidemiological studies conducted to look into various diseases. So here is one of the studies. This is the Swiss National Cohort Study. We have used data from 2000 to 2015. Basically, all inhabitants in Switzerland were included in that study. We only included people aged more than 30 years because we were interested in cardiovascular disease, and this is quite rare below. Basically, the data set is a linkage of the mortality record with census data, so we had quite some information that we also could take into account in the analysis, like socioeconomic position, education, civil status, and sex. We also adjusted our estimates for PM 2.5, and we had nationwide noise modeling done by EMPA for road, railway, and aircraft. Basically, for each building, we had a lot of estimations for different facet points that we could use. So we have linked that to this population and then have analyzed the data. And this is one of the main results, the cardiovascular disease mortality risk in relation to road traffic noise. And basically what we can see here is the increase in risk with increasing road traffic noise. What you see here in red is the WHO guidelines for road traffic noise, and the histogram behind is the distribution of road traffic noise exposure in Switzerland. So you can see that roughly about half of the population is exposed above the value proposed by the WHO. What is also quite interesting from this graph, this is actually a non-parametric exposure response curve. So this is one analysis where we are completely open how this form of the exposure response function could look like. And what we see is it's pretty linear, which may be a surprise or not, depending on what you think about noise exposure, but actually it's quite in line with many other studies that there's not a real jump in the exposure response function where there's no effect below and then suddenly it becomes very dangerous, but it is a continuous increase in risk. And you can imagine this is quite a challenge for guideline setting because there's no obvious threshold here where you would set the guidelines. So I will come back to that, but already here a teaser what we had to deal with. Here are the remaining results. Rail traffic noise, very similar results. So the first one we have just seen. And for air traffic noise, it may look a little bit strange at the beginning, but actually if you really go to reasonable noise levels of 40 to 45 dBs, that is where also road traffic noise is around, then basically the risk is more or less also linearly increasing. For myocardial infarction, similar results, quite a consistent, steady increase in risk with increasing noise exposure. And if these risks were expressed in excess risk per 10 dB, then basically the increase was between 0 and 3% for all cardiovascular disease and between 2 and 4.3% for myocardial infarction. We also looked in the Sapaldia study, a Swiss study on air pollution and lung disease in adults, on diabetes, also in other outcomes like depression, respiratory disease, and arterial stiffness. You find these publications in the literature. But here, for the guidelines, we mainly took into account diabetes. And you could see that we had 110 incident cases between 2000 and 2011 in 2,600 people, and this was basically significantly associated with road traffic noise. It was also associated with air traffic noise, but this was not significant, whereas with railway noise we did not see any associations. Again, many factors have been taken into account here, so the observed associations are unlikely due to socio-demographic factors or due to lifestyle factors, as this all has been considered in the data analysis. And again, very interesting for road and for aircraft, the exposure response function pretty linear. Here the black dots at the lower end are the observed diabetes cases. And again, the question is, where is the threshold? But also what we can see is that the confidence intervals are relatively wide. So we also have pooled this data together with other diabetes study that has been conducted. So here is our study. And here are other studies like from Denmark. And basically what can be seen is that other studies also consistently have observed an association between diabetes and road traffic noise. For aircraft noise, there are less studies, but also an association is seen in tendency, whereas for railway noise, only 2 studies are available and both did not find a risk increase. Then annoyance from this representative survey in Switzerland. Here the main results, the proportion of highly annoyed people, so those who have crossed 8, 9 or 10 on a scale from 0 to 10 for each source separately, in red for road traffic noise, in green for railway noise, and in blue for aircraft noise. And basically what can be seen is quite different curves. So for instance, at 60 decibels, 10% are highly annoyed because of road traffic noise. But if railway noise is 60 decibels, then it's 15%. And for aircraft noise of 60 decibels, it's more than 30%, which is highly annoyed. Similar pattern for, of course, here as well, what is the threshold? So I will come back to that. But as I just wanted to say, similar pattern for sleep disturbance, again, for aircraft noise, the exposure response function is much steeper than for road traffic and railway noise. So how did we develop the guidelines? Basically, the idea was to have it in an objective manner, science-based, and we used basically the same approach as the WHO in the development of the environmental noise guidelines, although we have slightly changed some of the decisions that we made. We have done separate assessment for road, rail, and aircraft noise, and basically we have looked at both subjective noise annoyance and also somatic health effects like diseases like cardiovascular disease, just in line with the federal constitution that the regulation should prevent from both disease and nuisance. So in general, the approach was to say, first we have determined what is the uncertainty level. And based on that, we had an acceptable, that is basically the reference level that we set. And from there, we said that is a certain risk is acceptable because it is written in the environmental law that it has to be a significant problem. And based on that, the limits were then set there, where basically this acceptable risk was exceeded, which was what would be here, for instance, in this example. For deriving the scientific evidence, we had several criteria. First of all, the relationship had to be plausible from a pathophysiological point of view and based on the evidence criteria from the WHO. There must also be a solid exposure-response relationship. And we wanted to have Swiss data in addition to the international studies. And we also wanted to be sure that the data from Switzerland did not contradict the results from other countries. So you may think, okay, we are a bit Swiss-centric, but actually we feel there are reasons why we should give higher weight to local data, because the effects of noise, which are mainly associations with the modeled outdoor noise, may quite depend on the building characteristics, on the culture, and so on. So we wanted to be sure that we really have data which somehow represented the situation here in Switzerland. And this is then the exposure-response relationship that we have derived. We basically had done meta-analysis and gave 50% weight to international data and 50% weight to Swiss data. So this was the assumption that we made. For noise annoyance, we accepted the proportion of affected people of 25% highly annoyed. For sleep disturbance, 15%. And for diseases, we looked into cardiovascular effects. On the one hand, in ischemic heart disease incidence, where we said an accepted relative excess risk would be 5%. And for cardiovascular mortality, it would be 2.5%. And for diabetes, the relative excess risk would be 20%, which would be accepted. So basically, on these 4 outcomes, we have derived the limits. Just an example how we did it from the curve that I just have shown before. Here's the curve for road traffic. So we looked where are 25% of the population highly annoyed. We took this value, and this was a kind of a first step. The same for cardiovascular disease. We had the uncertainty, we have the accepted risk, where we added 2.5% in case of cardiovascular mortality. And this brings us then also to a value, in this case, about 54 decibels. This was a kind of intermediate value that we used for the evaluation. And then for all these outcomes, we have derived this value. So we have done for the nuisance, for the annoyance, for the Swiss data, and for the WHO, for the international review. And we have taken the mean value of these two values that we have derived. And the same for the disease. We had cardiovascular mortality, ischemic heart disease incidence, and diabetes, where we had a meta-analysis of the Swiss data with the international data, and again took the mean value. And because the law has to protect from disease or nuisance, we took then the lower of these two values as the proposed regulation. And that is how it looks like. So for road, it would be 60 dB, for night 52 dB, railway 59 and 56, and for aircraft 54 during the day. And during the whole night, it would be 43, but because we have a night curfew, this made 49 and 52 for the different hours of night. And just to compare with the WHO guidelines, you actually see that the proposed limits are a bit higher in Switzerland than what would be the ideal situation. The main reason is that we have used different assumptions for the accepted risk than the WHO has done. We had also other recommendations. We proposed to be a bit more flexible in terms of rooms without long-term residential purpose, like office and hotels, because there the ambient, the outdoor situation is a bit less critical than for residential area. We also changed the point of measurements, that this is measured at the most exposed point on the facade. So far it was the window. We also proposed to extend the night period to 9 hours. Before it was 10 o'clock in the evening until 6 o'clock in the morning. And now we propose to go to 7 o'clock in the morning, because we have seen that people sleep longer than they did in the past. And we also proposed to only have one sensitive area, 2 and 3 together, and not separate sensitive zones. And no correction due to little traffic, which was the case in the previous regulation. So the conclusions, we have developed a proposal which is based on current state of scientific knowledge. The proposed limit would certainly protect the population better from noise than before. Obviously, noise protection is costly, but we also have to be aware noise causes a lot of health costs. In Switzerland, it is estimated that every year transportation noise causes 2.8 billion external costs, which has to be carried by the society. And in general, we think it's very important to focus on noise abatement measures at the source. So the existing limits for traffic noise underestimate the negative effects of noise on the population and do no longer meet the requirements of the Environmental Protection Act. That is why we think it should be updated. Now the report is with the Federal Council, and we will see what will happen, whether the regulations will be changed or whether the Council decides not to do at all. Certainly a very interesting future to see what will happen. So many thanks for your attention, and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Martin. Our next speaker is Sean Doyle. He is a senior aviation noise specialist with the FAA's Office of Environment and Energy, AEE. He joined the FAA in 2016, and he is an agency expert on aircraft noise policy and research. He has brought with him to the FAA nearly 10 years of airport consulting experience. He is an expert in aircraft noise modeling and works closely with multiple lines of business within the FAA to coordinate on research, policy, and outreach activities. Please welcome Sean Doyle.
FAA Aircraft Noise-Induced Health Impacts Research Activities. UC Davis Aviation Noise and Emissions Symposium. Hello, I'm Sean Doyle, Senior Aviation Noise Specialist at the FAA Office of Environment and Energy. Before going over our health impacts research programs, I wanted to give a quick picture of where the Office of Environment and Energy, or AEE, fits within the FAA. We are a staff office within Policy, International Affairs, and Environment, focusing on a range of cross-cutting policy, research, and engagement activities related to the environmental effects of aviation. As one of FAA's key research and development offices, we work with and sponsor a range of programs focused on developing cleaner and quieter aircraft technologies, in addition to working with universities and the larger research community to develop a greater understanding of aircraft noise. In particular, our Continuous Lower Energy Emissions and Noise, or CLEAN program, is a public-private partnership which has accelerated bringing new, environmentally beneficial aircraft technologies to the commercial fleet. Additionally, our Ascent Center of Excellence provides research grants to universities around the country to explore a wide range of projects to aid the FAA's understanding of the environmental effects of aviation. Our noise research program is one of FAA's key environmental focus areas, and as detailed in the January 2021 Federal Register Notice, is organized into three broad categories: effects of aircraft noise on individuals and communities, noise modeling, noise metrics, and environmental data visualization, and the reduction, abatement, and mitigation of aviation noise. Today, I'll be focusing on programs in the first area that are researching the potential health impacts related to aviation noise exposure. Under FAA's Health Impacts Research Program, we are working extensively with our university partners sponsored through the Ascent Center of Excellence and the FAA Technical Center. With the Boston University School of Public Health, we are engaged in a program to evaluate associations between aircraft noise exposure and cardiovascular disease outcomes. With the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, we are conducting a new national sleep study to quantify the relationship between aircraft noise exposure and sleep disturbance. While not included in today's presentation, we are additionally working with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology on companion work to assess the economic impacts of aircraft noise exposure on businesses and residential property values. As I'll discuss later, in addition to continuing as core aspects of FAA's noise research portfolio, the outcomes from these efforts will also inform future research efforts, as well as fulfill congressional obligations outlined in FAA's 2018 reauthorization. Through the work with Boston University, FAA is sponsoring research leveraging existing longitudinal health cohorts from the Nurses Health Study and its follow-up companion study to evaluate potential links between health outcomes and aircraft noise exposure. Critical to the success of this research has been a detailed assessment of the range of factors which can influence outcomes and the systematic approach taken to develop analytical capabilities to assess health outcomes while controlling for these factors. In the next two slides, I'll present preliminary outcomes from 4 of Boston University's sub-initiatives in these areas. In the first of these sub-initiatives, to better understand the potential effects of variability in aircraft noise distributions, the socio-demographic patterning of aircraft noise exposure was studied by comparing modeled aircraft noise exposure at census block group locations based on variation in race and ethnicity, education, and income across ranges in aircraft noise exposure. As an initial summary, it has been found that census block groups with higher Hispanic populations and proportion of residents with less than a high school education are more likely to live in areas experiencing higher aircraft noise exposure. In the next area, by examining associations between aircraft noise and incident hypertension observed in the Nurses Health studies, correlation for participants residing in areas above and below DNL 55 dB were studied. Using a combined parsimonious model adjusted for age, calendar year, race, physical activity, smoking status, alcohol use, diet, education, income, and region of residence, a 10% increased risk of hypertension with a 95% confidence interval falling between 1 and 19% was observed. Adjusting for additional factors such as family history of hypertension and body mass index, a combined fully adjusted model showed a 6% increase of hypertension with a 95% confidence interval of between -2% and 15%. It is also important to note that the relationship between noise and hypertension was not affected by an additional control factor for particulate matter air pollution. As with all studies of this type, careful consideration of potential bias must be taken into account, and should therefore be noted that the limited demographic availability of the participants in the nurses' health studies could be a limiting factor. FA is working actively with Boston University to review these results, as well as to evaluate whether similar analysis could be conducted using more recent health cohort study data with expanded demographic availability. In the final two Boston University sub-initiatives, research is still ongoing, but as an overview of these efforts, the nurses' health studies are also being leveraged to look in more detail at correlations between aircraft noise exposure and cardiovascular disease, including heart attacks and strokes. Due to the relatively low numbers of participants experiencing cardiovascular disease in the nurses' health studies, comparisons are being made for participants exposed to aircraft noise levels above and below DNL 45 dB. Results of this assessment are currently being prepared for peer review. In the last of these initiatives, Boston University is also reviewing the relationship between sleep quality and nighttime aircraft noise exposure. Further investigation is still needed, but an initial review of the sleep markers available through these studies does show that higher rates of insufficient sleep occur at higher aircraft noise exposure levels. In the next slides, I will present an overview of FAA's National Sleep Study. This study is being led by a team from the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine with technical contract support from HMMH for aircraft noise modeling and WESTAT for statistical analysis and survey design. The objective of the study is to generate a dose-response relationship between aircraft noise exposure and sleep disturbance using robust yet inexpensive methods so that a large sample size distributed across the country can be obtained. Initial work on the study design began in 2016 under support from the FAA Ascent Center of Excellence, culminating in 2 pilot studies aimed at establishing the feasibility and refining the techniques needed for conducting a larger national study. With the feasibility of the national study successfully demonstrated by these 2 pilot studies, the FAA and the University of Pennsylvania then began work to develop the National Sleep Study. Beginning recruitment in late 2021 for participants around 77 U.S. airports experiencing a range of nighttime aircraft noise exposure, the study will continue to seek statistically sampled participants over a 2-year data collection window. The National Sleep Study has been designed as a field study to collect data on sleep disturbance relative to varying degrees of aircraft noise exposure and may be used to inform future policy considerations. The study relies on an inexpensive methodology using artigraphy and electrocardiography tested through the Ascent pilot studies. Participants living near 77 U.S. airports are being selected using stratified random population sampling based on nighttime noise exposure levels in 5 decibel intervals between L-night 40 and 55 decibels. A target of 400 study participants will be recruited over the 2-year collection period. The National Sleep Study will develop exposure response function describing the relationship between the maximum sound pressure level of an aircraft as measured inside the study participant's bedroom and the probability of awakening based on physiological measurements. To meet both federal requirements and ensure the robustness of the study design and methodology, multiple reviews have been conducted and approvals granted prior to study participant data being collected. Primary reviews have been conducted by the University of Pennsylvania and WESTAT Institutional Review Boards, the Department of Transportation Bureau of Transportation Statistics, and the Executive Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs under the Office of Management and Budget. Once selected, participants are then mailed the equipment shown, including self-applied physiological monitoring devices to capture electrocardiography and body movements data. Sound level recordings are using a portable audio recorder with a Class 1 microphone are also provided to capture nighttime noise levels in the participant's bedroom. Each participant agrees to take part in the study for 5 consecutive nights of data collection. To ensure that a target of 400 study participants is reached over the course of the 2-year collection window, the study team is carefully monitoring the acceptance rate of participants. While several exclusion criteria are in place to ensure that underlying health or behavioral conditions do not bias the study, we are currently meeting our recruitment target and expect to reach our collection goal in late 2023. The FAA and the University of Pennsylvania look forward to providing additional updates and results for this study as they become available. In conclusion, I would like to provide a brief overview of FAA's key next steps in its efforts to better understand and utilize the results of our health impacts research. Working with Boston University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, FAA is developing a report to Congress on a study on potential health and economic impacts of overflight noise. This report will include information based on the cardiovascular health impacts research presented here, as well as companion research on economic impacts. The FAA also plans to continue support of research to understand the health impacts from aircraft noise through our Ascent Center of Excellence, including expanded health impacts research through use of more recent longitudinal health studies, as well as exploring new research opportunities for health impacts and sleep disruption mitigation. Lastly, it is FAA's goal to incorporate our research findings on human response, including research on health impacts from aviation noise exposure, into future policy considerations. While some of these research programs will still require time to mature, the FAA will be evaluating their outcomes on a continual basis to inform well-reasoned, scientifically grounded policies. For further reference, please find these links to associated publications and the Ascent project websites for additional details on the research programs I have highlighted today. Thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you, Sean.
For your attention.
Our final speaker this morning is Brad Pierce. He's the president of N.O.I.S.E, National Organization to Ensure a Sound Controlled Environment. He also serves as the chair of the Centennial Airport Community Noise Roundtable in Colorado. He served as the environmental representative to the Next Gen Advisory Committee of the NAC since 2014. And he also served on the Aurora, Colorado City Council from 2003 to 2017 and has been an effective advocate on community noise impacts in all of his roles. Please welcome Brad.
Good morning. My name is Brad Pierce. I'm president of the National Organization to Ensure a Sound Controlled Environment. And I'm here today to make a presentation to you all, and thanks for being here today. I'm going to share my screen and then I'll get started in just a moment. There we go. My presentation today is aviation noise and its impact on community health research and proposed legislation. First, a minute about the National Organization to Ensure a Sound Control Environment, of which I'm the president. We are a group that's been around for about 40 years, as America's only nationwide community-based association comprised of local elected officials representing millions of Americans across the country. Our mission is that we are committed to reducing the impact of aviation noise on local communities by partnering with communities to join and inject the concerns of their constituents into the national debate on airport noise. I want to talk for a second about our noise team. So the executive officers of the noise organization are listed there. In addition to me being the president of NOISE, I'm also chair of the Centennial Airport Colorado Community Noise Roundtable. And our staff, Emily Tranter, the executive director of NOISE, and the communications director and press and communications staff person. So I wanted to talk about some highlights of past legislation related to the health impacts of noise. The first one is the FAA Air Transportation Modernization Safety Improvement Act, S-223, sponsored by Senator John D. Rockefeller IV. Sections of this bill required studies on environmental impact of airplane noise and pollution and act to mitigate this environmental impact. This included possible harm to human health based on noise or pollution. The next one is the Aviation Impacted Communities Act, HR 6168, sponsored by Representative Adam Smith. Established designated aviation impact communities with community boards intended to examine and advocate for the mitigation of adverse impacts of airports, including noise and health impacts. In addition, this bill established grants for hospitals and nursing homes in such communities for noise mitigation, which was intended to improve health outcomes related to aviation noise. Number three, a bill to require a study on the health impacts of air traffic noise pollution, S-2422, sponsored by Senator Elizabeth Warren. This bill required the Federal Aviation Administration to enter into an arrangement with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine to examine and report on the various health impacts of air traffic noise and pollution. These agencies would convene a committee of experts to issue an expert consensus report on the current scientific knowledge on the health impacts of air traffic noise and pollution. Number four, Air Traffic Noise and Pollution Expert Consensus Act of 2017, HR 3938, sponsored by Representative Stephen F. Lynch. Similar to the previous bill, this bill mandated the creation of an expert panel to examine the health impacts of noise and other factors from airports. Next is the FAIR Act, HR 5109, sponsored by Representative Jackie Speier, designated the efficient use of airspace and the mitigation of airplane noise and other health impacts as co-equal concerns for the FAA. Thus, the only higher concern was the safety of aircraft itself. Next is the Air Traffic Noise and Pollution Expert Consensus Act of 2019, HR 976, sponsored by Representative Stephen F. Lynch. Similar to the previous Air Traffic Noise and Pollution Expert Consensus Act of 2017, this bill would have created a committee of experts under the FAA and the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. This committee would be required to create a consensus report on the health impacts of air traffic noise and pollution using the most current scientific knowledge. Now, the present legislation, here are some of the current bills related to community health and aviation noise. Aviation Noise and Emissions Act, Mitigation Act, HR 6050, sponsored by Representative Adam Smith. This bill would require the development of grant programs through the EPA for research on health impacts of aircraft and airplane noise and emissions. This research would then be used to create mitigation plans to counteract these health impacts. And secondly, the Air Traffic Noise and Expert Consensus Act of 2021, HR 712, sponsored by Stephen F. Lynch. Like past air traffic noise and pollution expert consensus acts, this act would mandate the creation of an expert committee who would then provide a consensus report on the health impacts of aviation noise, among other factors. An example of the proposed legislation in 2021. The Aviation Noise and Emissions Act is intended to help understand the effects of noise and other pollution emitted by airports and aircraft. This is an example of airport regulations from statutes already signed into law on federal airport noise regulations program through 2021. The Aircraft Noise Prevention Act, the aircraft noise provisions in the FAA reauthorization of 2018 referenced in this slide include several sections addressing how the FAA should study and address community concerns related to airport noise. The specific provision of this slide, section 189, requires a study to be conducted that is focused on the impact of aviation noise on residents in the metro areas of Boston, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Northern California Metroplex, Phoenix, Southern California Metroplex, Seattle, and other areas. The scope of the study shall include, number one, an examination of the incremental health impacts attributable to noise exposure that result from aircraft flights, including sleep disturbance and elevated blood pressure. Number two, focus on residents in the metropolitan areas of Boston, Chicago, District of Columbia, New York, Northern California Metroplex, Phoenix, Southern California Metroplex, Seattle, and any such area as identified by the administrator. Number three, consider in particular the incremental health impacts on residents living partly or wholly underneath flight paths most frequently used by aircraft flying at an altitude of lower than 10,000 feet, including during takeoff or landing. Number four, include an assessment of the relationship between a perceived increase in aircraft noise, including as a result of a change in flight paths that increases the visibility of aircraft from a certain location, and an actual increase in aircraft noise, particularly in areas with high or variable levels of non-aircraft related noise. And number five, consider the economic harm or benefits to businesses located partly or wholly underneath flight paths most frequently used by aircraft at an altitude lower than 10,000 feet, including takeoff or landing. Now, this slide is talking about the Harvard School of Public Health and Boston University School of Public Health study. In 2013, researchers from Harvard and Boston University performed the first major study to estimate the association between residential exposure to aircraft noise and cardiovascular hospitalizations using data on the nationally represented US population age 65 and older and noise data from airports around the country. This data set for the study included hospital admission counts, number of people at risk, exposure to aircraft noise, potential confounders for 2,218 zip codes surrounding 89 airports. A 10 decibel increase in aviation noise was found to increase the risk of a cardiovascular hospital admission in a zip code by 3.5%. In addition, 2.3 of these hospitalizations in the Medicare cohort were attributable to aircraft noise. And 23% of the Medicare cohort was exposed to greater than 55 decibels of sound. This means that in addition to the human cost, there is a significant drain on federal resources in relation to aviation noise. Air pollution had a fairly comparable effect on cardiovascular related hospitalization when juxtaposed with air pollution and ozone, and yet this issue receives much less attention. Finally, the population attributable fraction for noise was similar in the subset of zip codes with air pollution data, meaning that noise did actually have an effect that was not simply covered up by air pollution. This chart summarizes the results using the categorized 90th percentile noise exposure variable, low, medium, or high. Low noise indicates 50 decibels, medium is 50 to 55 decibels, and high noise indicates greater than 55 decibels. Each of these different levels of exposure were also compared within 3 different models. Model 1 controls for individual demographics such as age, sex, and race. Model 2 additionally controls for zip code level socioeconomic status and demographics, such as percent Hispanic and median household income. And Model 3 adds to Model 2 by also controlling for fine particulate matter and ozone levels. In Model 3, controlling for socioeconomic status, demographic, and pollution variables, there was a statistically significant evidence of an increase in the hospital admission rate for cardiovascular disease when comparing high versus medium exposure and high versus low exposure, but not statistically significant evidence of an increase when comparing medium versus low exposure. This is a comparison with other studies that have been done. There are a few key points that distinguish this study from those done in the past. Firstly, this study investigated the noise cardiovascular hospitalization relation across grades of airport noise exposure levels for the largest number of airports and population of older people studied to date. The administrative data used captured the majority of older US adults who represented an age group at greater risk for cardiovascular disease. There were a large group of events analyzed in comparison with previous studies, increasing the ability to detect relations and draw conclusions from the data. Future studies should also seek to include a larger amount of data. This study also evaluated the relation of noise with cardiovascular hospitalization as the outcome, which to their knowledge had been rarely considered in previous noise studies. Contrasting with previous studies, such as an ecological study of 62 municipalities around an airport in Amsterdam, which found no clustering of cardiovascular hospitalizations in areas close to the airport, this study assessed the relation for individual at-risk people by estimating the whole exposure response relation. This is a major improvement from past work as it helps those who are actually in danger of cardiovascular disease and hospitalizations and measures all of the relevant data. In addition, the study provides evidence within the United States where the housing stock and other factors may differ from the European populations generally studied in the past. US studies in the past have been more limited and have not yielded interpretable evidence. For example, the only major US study to date that investigated the relation between aircraft noise and mortality was conducted more than 30 years ago, focused on a single airport, and was critiqued for inadequately controlling for age, sex, and race and other analytical flaws. The study suggests that although an exposure response relation exists between noise and cardiovascular admission rates, there may also be a threshold for the effect of noise exposure on cardiovascular disease hospitalizations. Results from the models using a category exposure variable showed consistent significant correlations only in the highest exposure group, meaning 55 decibels. These findings are broadly consistent with previous literature suggesting the possibility of a threshold effect for the aircraft noise cardiovascular relation. For example, in a categorical analysis, other scholars observed significant mortality from myocardial infarction with aircraft noise only in the highest group of 60 decibels or more. Other studies found associations with hypertension, with hypertension outcomes with 50 decibels or more, but did not see results with categories further divided above 50 decibels, likely due to the small number in higher categories. It should be noted that the noise exposure metrics were calculated differently from those in prior studies, so the noise level at which effects are seen cannot be directly compared. The conclusion of the Boston study. Aircraft noise, particularly characterized by the 90th percentile of noise exposure among census blocks within zip codes, had a large effect in raising the relative rate of hospitalizations for cardiovascular disease among older people residing near airports. This relation remained after controlling for individual data, zip code level, socioeconomic status, and demographics, air pollution, and roadway proximity variables. The results provide evidence of a statistically significant association between exposure to aircraft noise and cardiovascular health, particularly at higher exposure levels. Further research should refine these associations and strengthen causal interpretation by investigating modifying factors at the airport or individual level. That concludes my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'll be looking forward to the questions in the Q&A section. So thank you very much. This concludes my presentation, and
Great. All right, thank you, Brad. And I think that we're going to be getting our speakers on Zoom, joining us live from all over the world. All right, I think we got everybody? Okay, great, awesome. The first question is for Ayodele. Very interesting that you're using C weighting. How would your results be qualitatively different if you had used A weighting? Oh. Oh, I'm sorry, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
C weighting has been demonstrated to be more sensitive to high noise, high level noises. So it's quite more appropriate because the intention was to actually get the peak noises, at the different time, the reading was actually taken. So it will be more, it has actually more sensitive than a weighting system, because with a weighting system, we will not be able to get the best of the highest or the peak noise for the different periods.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Sean. Has there been any flight adjustments or improvements by the FAA as a result of any of this health research? What are some benefits to the community?
So it's a great question. And I think, as I alluded to in my last slide, we're working to figure out the best ways to operationalize this research to do, as you said. Right now, the research programs are still maturing. A lot of the health impacts research specifically, is getting to a point where some preliminary conclusions can be made, but there's still a lot of questions. Particularly, like I said, that the key to doing a good job with this research is to get these long-term health cohort studies and to examine them to the fullest extent possible. But with some of these, there's inherent biases. The Nurses Health Study is predominantly Caucasian women, as an example, just because of the nature of that collection. So, as we look to inform policies based on this, we have to take a careful look at those inherent biases, as well as to understand a lot of interdependencies within the research. The thing that plagues health research is that correlation does not imply causation. And so I think you've heard some of the other speakers talk too, that's always a challenge when you're looking at this, to tease out the other controlling factors so that you understand what is due to the aviation noise exposure and what's due to the other underlying factors. And so there's still work to be done to fully understand that, to the point that we can directly apply it into like an actionable policy. But we're looking to take this information as it matures and try to build processes that can start taking advantage of it, not necessarily waiting for the full body of knowledge to be complete. But as we learn more, we're hoping to start incorporating it. The sleep study, as an example, is probably something that we're hoping to see more direct results from in the conclusion of its work in a couple of years, and look forward to figuring out how we might apply some of those findings.
Great, thank you, Sean. The next question is for Martin. Why is your concern only with source noise as a mitigation?
Maybe this is an important question, and maybe a bit of a misunderstanding. What I wanted to say is that measures at the source have highest priority, whereas measures on the propagation path, like for instance noise barriers, might be needed in certain circumstances, but in particular in like in urban areas, these measures are often not very useful. It creates segregation between the spatial places, and also like soundproof windows are maybe useful in certain situations, but they don't protect the outdoor space. So that is why basically our commission thinks that whenever possible, first we should try to reduce noise at the source. And this could be speed limits, it could be pavement, it could be the low noise tires, and so on. There's many of these kind of measures.
Great, thank you, Martin. The next question is for Sean. Can you speak to the statistical significance of the noise health impact studies? For example, is the 6% increase in hypertension statistically significant?
Yeah, great question. And as you saw, the researchers ran two different models with different ranges of controlling factors, and you got different confidence intervals on those. With the one that tried to, the fully adjusted model that tried to bring in additional factors, we saw 95% confidence bounds between -2 and I think it was 10% or something. So there does seem to be a statistically meaningful trend that is definitely suggesting that higher hypertension rates occur at DNL levels above 55. But when you look at those error bars, it still shows us as an indication that there are other factors that are inherently in those populations in the nurses health study that might need to be explored. So we have additional research. We're going to keep looking at that and try to tighten up some of those confidence intervals to really understand exactly what that trend is, as well as, like I said, look at other cohorts that are available that can give us a broader demographic distribution, and are also, some of the more modern data that's available can have other more finer scale information on the health outcomes.
Great, thank you. And Sean, this is a little bit of a follow-up. This is another question. Of the areas that have to be included in the study, does the District of Columbia include the Baltimore area?
I believe I assume this is referencing back to reauthorization. I believe it was more of an or than an and for a lot of those areas. The Nurses Health Study is based predominantly of populations in the Boston area.
Okay. Thank you. And then it looks like we have a final question, and we're right up at the end of our session. So this is good timing. And again, this is for Sean. It seems that we have an adequate body of scientific studies on the health effects of aviation noise. Why doesn't the FAA do an analysis of these existing studies rather than conducting new studies on this topic?
So I think broadly within the whole body of research, and I think any of the researchers here would agree that, we need to continue to look to refine this. While you're correct, there's a large body of research out there. Oftentimes, you have to look with a critical eye at what scenarios certain findings apply and where they don't apply. Certainly within some of the literature that I provide references to for our studies, that's a core component of what they did. They compared their results back to other results in the literature. Just as research goes, you continually look to improve. You compare your results against others to see, is it supported by that evidence, or you uncover something new or found a deficiency. And so, I think that just never ends. You have to continually improve your knowledge as time goes on, and as more information is available, as more refinement in these studies occurs. That's not to say that we need to wait to react to any of this. I think we do want to look at finding new ways to incorporate some of this into decision making, but also just trying to make sure that we're not going down a direction that's not supported, or that there's things that are inconclusive or not in agreement across the research communities.
Great, thank you. That brings us to the end of this session. I want everyone to please thank our speakers again now that they're live. Thanks for participating.